And Lord, as we look at what it means to be a prophet here in Tewantin this morning, we just ask that the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts will be acceptable in your sight. Amen. Is there a single truth in life that we can all observe, or is truth contextual? Okay, let's do a little exercise. Pat, can you describe to me what you see?
Black pen.
Hold on. That's an assumption that it's a pen. Could be a pencil. Tell me what you see.
A cylinder-shaped black object pointed at one end.
So you can see a point, can
with a
you?
handle.
You can see a point, can you?
Yes.
You sure? Because if it's from that, I don't think I can see a point at that end.
You think?
You can see the point at the other end.
Yes. Yes.
You can?
Pointed at the
Are you sure?
one end.
What do you see?
A pointy end this end.
A pointy end this end. That's about all you can see?
Yeah.
Yeah? What do you see, Neil?
This is getting tough. I see a cylinder that's black with some silver circles around it. I see a silver end on this end, a point on this end, and a loop over the top, if you like,
Okay.
a handle.
Thank you. Which one of you wasn't telling the truth? Because you saw something that was flat and cylinder. You saw something that was pointed, and you saw something completely different. Which one of the three of you was telling the truth?
Me.
You were.
We all were.
You all were. Ah. So maybe truth is contextual. The former moderator of the Uniting Church, the Reverend Dave Baker, he used to have many sayings, but the one that I passionately remember is always, let your truth be told. When you went into a meeting, you'd always say, let your truth be told. It doesn't make any sense to say that, unless, of course, your truth is different to my truth. In which case, your truth doesn't matter. Oh. As a chaplain working with kids, or as a counsellor working with adults, so often we hear things that go like this. She said. He did. But what we really want to have in that situation is the truth. And the only truth that you can have is your truth. And your truth starts with, when you said, I heard. When you did, I felt. Because now it's my truth that I'm talking about. I'm not assigning blame to anybody else. What I'm saying is, this is what it did to me. Today's reading is Isaiah, and of course we all know that Isaiah was a prophet. Isaiah lived in Jerusalem during the latter half of Israel's kingdom period. And he spoke to the leaders of Jerusalem and to Judah on God's behalf. Isaiah brought with him a warning about God's judgment, telling Israel's leaders that they were corrupt and their rebellion against God and the covenant would come at a cost. Corey Diver, who is the Managing Director for Life, leading the integration of faith and entrepreneurship in Miami University, says, talking about the prophets in general, and Isaiah specifically, that what he loves is the emotional self-revelation of God. Diver suggests that Isaiah 65 is the last turn in an ongoing emotional conversation about loss, betrayal, longing, and unresolved hurt among God's returning exiles and the people of the land. He suggests that an appropriate metaphor for the final chapters of Isaiah were to be read it as a father and son who have struggled with each other for decades. And he goes on to tell this story. In 1952, a New York City probation officer searched for more than a year to find an organization somewhere in the Bronx that would take in a 12-year-old needy youngster. Although the boy had a religious background, none of the major religious groups would make room for him because he came from a sect that none of them recognized. The result was that the 12-year-old, in using the words of Isaiah, went in a way that was not good. The young boy's name? Lee Harvey Oswald. Wikipedia tells us that Lee Harvey Oswald was a US Marine veteran who assassinated John F. Kennedy, the 35th President of the United States. At age 12, Oswald was placed in a juvenile detention for truancy, during which time he was assessed by a psychiatrist as emotionally disturbed due to a lack of normal family life. I wonder what would have happened if any of those religious organisations that the police officer approached had said, yes, we will find a home for this young boy, and we will walk alongside him, and we will walk with his truth, and walk with him to see where we can guide him in the ways of God. Maybe history might be different had that happened. We've just had Synod in session. Marion reported to us last week at the church council that it wasn't as scary as she thought it was going to be. Other people who I've spoken to have said that it was the best Synod in session that they have ever attended. But I've also spoken to a couple of people who were involved in a prayer chapel that ran alongside the Synod in session. And they said that it wasn't quite the best Synod in session ever. Not for them anyway. Because what they heard was people lamenting how their voice wasn't being heard. See, in the Uniting Church in Australia, we use a consensus decision-making model. And it's a great way to get to decisions. Because it encourages those who don't have a voice to speak up and to be heard. But even when we get to consensus, the pain of having your truth not recognised by someone else doesn't go away simply because of the way that we've got to the decision. What about when your voice is not being heard? Have you ever been in a room when someone suddenly stood up and yelled, "Listen to me"? Has that ever happened to you? I'd like to suggest that Isaiah is a truth teller. Upset with Israel's national behavior, Isaiah asked God to pour his wrath onto Israel. And here in Isaiah 65, we see God's answer to Isaiah's prayer. God answers with unwavering grace. I said, "Here am I. Here am I." Or if we read from the Message version, it says, "I've made myself available to those who haven't bothered to ask. I'm here, ready to be found by those who haven't bothered to look. I kept saying, I'm here. I'm right here to a nation that ignored me. I reached out day after day to a people who turned their backs on me. People who make wrong turns, who insist on doing things their own way." It's a rather emotional cry out, isn't it? I don't know if anybody knows the name Captain Eric Moody. He was a British Airways captain many years ago. He had the unfortunate situation where he was flying his aircraft over a volcano, and the volcanic ash had come up from the volcano, and at that point in time he had lost all 4 engines. And here is Captain Moody's address to the passengers on the plane. "This is your captain speaking. We have a small problem. All 4 engines have stopped. We're doing our damnedest to get them going again. I trust you're not in too much distress." Think about it. Was he telling the truth? Yes. Did he create panic in the cabin? No. Because it was done with such a cool, calm voice. This is the situation. We're going to try and get it fixed. That's it. It's just matter of fact. That's the truth. Well, there might have been one or two in the aircraft that might have thought that was not necessarily the best thing to hear on their travel. Isaiah, though, is not speaking in that cool, calm, collected voice, is he? This is more like a ship's captain when the ship's about to go down, saying, "Now hear this. This is your captain speaking. Pay attention. This is serious." That's what Isaiah is doing. There would be judgment, but it would come soon enough. But as we talk about God judgment, the image that Isaiah shows is one of God with open arms, saying, "Come back to me." God's welcome home to a nation of prodigals was unwavering. His open arms had never narrowed, and his love had never faltered. He was always there for them. The same is true for the new spiritual Israel, the Christian church. Paul reminds us of this in Romans 10, where he says, "People find and welcome me who never so much as looked for me, and I find and welcome people who had never even asked about me." In verses 3 to 7 in Isaiah, we see Israel's response to this history of love with no boundaries. He says, "There, God's there." It really was a response of indifference. And God says, in effect, that they have taken an in-your-face attitude towards him. And the ultimate insult is delivered when they ordered God out of their national affairs because they believed they knew better than God. I wonder, when we look around at our society today, are we trying to shut God out of our national affairs? Are we worshipping the polytheism of political correctness? God's patience will not last forever. I suggest to you that Israel's attitude towards God came back to haunt them, as will ours. I know of a minister who was standing at the door at the end of the service, and one of his congregation members came up to him and he said, "I didn't much like worship today." And the minister's response was, "That's okay. We didn't come to worship you today. We came to worship God." It's a harsh response, yes. But is there truth in it? Yeah. What issues trouble us because we walk in ways that are not good? What issues plague someone you know, perhaps even yourself, because we disregard sound counsel? How many of our national problems are linked to children being raised up with no knowledge, no reference to God in their education or in their home life? How long will we persist in going in a way that is not good before we realize that trying to shut out God out of our lives actually ends up locking in Satan into our lives? Joe, can we have this song, please? I just want to share with you a song.